Senator Markey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your service to our country. We very much appreciate all your great work. Secretary Moniz, one of the assertions which is made is that after 15 years, that all bets are off, and that Iran can then begin to enrich, theoretically, up to 90%, if they want, which is a bomb-grade material. Could you deal with that issue? That is, what happens in 15 years? What happens when Iran announces that it would go past 3%, go past 5%, go past 20% in terms of its enrichment of uranium? What is the law, the regulation, the sense of the world community in terms of what they could do at that point to make sure that there was not a bomb-making program that was now put in place in Iran?
Well, of course, Senator, first of all, whether it's 15 years or 20 years or whenever, they will be required to report all their nuclear activity, and clearly, if they were to report that they were enriching to 90%, every alarm bell in the world would go off, because there's no reason to do that.
And when the alarm bell went off, what would then happen?
I would imagine there would be, first of all, extraordinarily strong, and I would imagine cohesive international pressure, perhaps sanctions, and perhaps a military response.
So, for example, what would Russia's response be in 15 years if Iran started enriching to 50, 60, 80, 90%? What would happen?
Everything I saw in the last months of negotiation is they would be solidly with us in very, very strong opposition to that.
Secretary Kerry, do you agree with that?
Totally. They and China were really surprisingly and very welcomingly deeply committed to this effort, and very anti any nuclear weapon for Iran.
So in 15 years, Secretary Moniz, please continue.
No, I was going to say, and then, of course, so I mentioned if they declared this, the alarm bells would go off. But furthermore, if they didn't declare it, which would be a more likely scenario, frankly, what we still have is, through these 25 years, actually, the containment and surveillance on any manufacturing of centrifuges, the uranium. So once again, they would need the entire supply chain covertly, which would be an extraordinarily difficult thing to carry off.
Okay. So in the early years, Secretary Moniz, if Iran decided that they wanted to violate the agreement, after dismantling their program, how long would it take for them to take their rotors, their components out of mothballs and to reconstitute their program in the first 10 years if we were successful in watching its dismantlement in the early years?
I'd say in rough terms, 2 to 3 years, probably to do that. That would depend a lot upon conditions of the machines, et cetera. But that's a ballpark.
Yeah. Secretary Kerry.
Senator, I just wanted to add something, because you're dealing sort of with this 15-year concept, but the truth is, because of the 25-year tracking of their uranium, it would be impossible for them to have a separate covert track. So the only track by which they might be able to begin to enrich would be through the declared facility, and we would know it instantaneously.
And the world would say, stop.
Exactly.
Okay. So let me ask you this, Secretary Kerry. You spoke earlier about the Iranian foreign minister visiting the Emirates this weekend. Can you talk about that and what your hopes are for the unfolding diplomatic opportunities that may be possible in that region?
I will, Senator Markey, but I would preface it by saying to all my colleagues that nothing that we've done in here is predicated on some change or something that's unanticipatable. Can one hope that this kind of opportunity perhaps provides a moment for possibilities and change? Yes, absolutely. And in fact, President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif, both in their public statements embracing this arrangement, talked about how it could open a new moment in the Middle East for the countries to be able to come together and be able to resolve some of the differences that have separated them. I know for a fact that the foreign minister of Iran wants to engage with the GCC countries, that this is not the only country he plans to visit. He wants to sit down with them. The Saudis have indicated a willingness to sit down. So who knows where that dialogue goes, but I can guarantee you the United States will do everything that we can to encourage it and to try to help it find some kind of specific steps that might be able to begin to deal with Yemen, with the Houthi, with other issues that we face.
You spoke earlier about the Saudis, and you've talked to them in the last week. Could you expand upon that a little bit more in terms
Well,
of
let
what
me
you
just
feel
say,
is a possibility going forward?
Generally, what I would say, Senator, is this, that of course, all the countries in the region are apprehensive because they see Iran engaged with the Houthi in Yemen. They see them engaged with the Shia Iraqi in Iraq. They see them also fighting against ISIL. They also see them in Syria, where they've made the most havoc supporting Assad and supporting Hezbollah over the years. And Hezbollah obviously is a threat to Israel, a threat to the region, not to mention that there's been support for Hamas even lately. These things concern us deeply, and that concerns them. And that is precisely why we have come together and are working on what I talked about earlier with, I think, Senator Gardner, about the evolution of the Camp David process that begins to fill out a new security arrangement and a new understanding of how together we can push back against these activities.
Thank you. Secretary Moniz, did you want to add anything in terms of the likelihood that there could be a breakout under the regime, the legal regime which we have in place, that would not be detected early enough in order for there to be an international response?
No, I think a breakout would be very quickly, I think, detected, and then it's a question of the response. And of course, especially in this first decade or so, I think we have and beyond the first decade, I think we have a very comfortable period of time to do diplomatic and/or other responses.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank all of you for your work. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator.